confess, I never considered what...
You, the great Victor Franklin, you made a mistake.
This was the way. It would hunt you just for being who you are. Finished. Much more carnage.
What if the world's most famous monster has a story you've never heard before? Join Reviews Vola as we dive into Frankenstein 2025, review of facts and shocking details. Oh, watch till the end, because this monster story is far more terrifying than you think. Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, is a Gothic novel written by the English author Mary Shelley. The book was first published in 1818. Frankenstein tells the story of Victor Frankenstein, a young scientist who does something totally wild and creates a living, intelligent creature using different human body parts in a strange and unorthodox scientific experiment. Mary Shelley started writing this legendary story when she was just 18 years old while she was staying in the city of Bath. The first edition of the book was published anonymously in London on January 1, 1818, when Shelley was only 20 years old. At first, the book didn't have her name on it. Her name was finally included in a French translation that was published in Paris in 1821. In 1815, Mary Shelley traveled around Europe. During her journey, she traveled along the Rhine River in Germany and stopped in a place called Gernsheim, which was about 11 miles or 17 kilometers away from Frankenstein Castle. Around 100 years earlier, an alchemist named Johann Conrad Dippel had reportedly carried out experiments in that area. Because of this connection, some people believe that the place and its history may have helped inspire parts of Shelley's famous story. After that, Mary traveled to the Geneva region of Switzerland, which later became an important setting in the novel. During this time, topics like galvanism, the idea that electricity could affect or even bring life to dead muscles, and different occult ideas were popular subjects of conversation among Mary and the people around her. These discussions were especially interesting to her lover and future husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley. Then came the summer of 1816, a year that would become a huge part of the story behind Frankenstein. At the suggestion of the famous poet Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, John Polidori, and Byron himself all agreed to try writing their own ghost stories. Basically, they challenged each other to come up with a creepy and scary tale. Mary thought about her story for several days, trying to come up with an idea that would really stand out. Then she had a powerful and terrifying idea. She imagined a scientist who somehow managed to create life, only to become completely horrified by the living creature he had brought into the world. That strange and frightening idea became the foundation for what would eventually become Frankenstein. The novel was first released anonymously in 1818, meaning readers didn't initially know that Mary Shelley was the person who wrote it. Years later, in 1831, a revised version of the novel was published with Mary's name on it. This new edition wasn't just a simple reprint. Shelley made several important changes to the writing and style of the story. She also added a new preface where she explained more about how she came up with the idea for Frankenstein. The revised version also had a stronger and more obvious moral message. Over the years, Frankenstein has become one of the most famous and important works in all of English literature. The novel mixes elements of Gothic horror with ideas from the Romantic movement, making it both dark and emotional, while also exploring big questions about science, life, ambition, responsibility, and what it really means to be human. The story has had a massive impact on literature and popular culture. It helped inspire an entire genre of horror stories, movies, TV shows, plays, and other forms of entertainment. Even today, people continue to tell new versions of the Frankenstein story and create their own interpretations of its characters. One interesting thing is that the name Frankenstein is often used to describe the monster itself. However, in the original story, Frankenstein is actually the name of Victor Frankenstein, the scientist who creates the creature. The creature itself is never officially given a name. Over time, though, popular culture started calling the monster Frankenstein, and that misunderstanding has become one of the most common things people associate with the story. Pligas in 1857, a Royal Danish Navy ship called the Horizont is traveling toward the North Pole, but the ship gets completely trapped in thick ice. The crew tries their best to break through the ice and get the ship moving again. But everyone is getting more and more exhausted. Captain Anderson is determined to finish his mission and reach the North Pole, even though he knows the journey ahead is extremely dangerous. One day, the crew notices a huge explosion in the distance. Captain Anderson, played by Lars Mikkelsen, and his men go to investigate. That's when they discover a badly injured man named Victor Frankenstein, played by Oscar Isaac. Victor is seriously hurt and has a prosthetic leg. The crew brings Victor back onto their ship, but things get crazy really fast. A terrifying creature, played by Jacob Elordi, suddenly attacks them. The creature demands that Victor be handed over to him. Captain Anderson orders his men to open fire. The crew shoots the creature several times, but somehow the creature just keeps coming. He refuses to stop and eventually climbs aboard the ship. The creature attacks the crew and kills several men. Captain Anderson fights back and uses a blunderbuss, an old fashioned firearm, to blast the creature off the ship and send him crashing into the freezing water. Victor later tells Anderson that the creature has already killed 6 members of his crew. But Victor also warns him that the creature can't be killed that easily. Victor begs Captain Anderson to give him to the creature if the monster comes back. Victor explains that he is the one who created the creature. He then begins telling Captain Anderson the whole story of how everything started. Part I. Victor's tale. Victor's story begins with the death of his mother, Claire, played by Mia Goth. She dies while giving birth to Victor's younger brother, William, played by Felix Kammerer. After Claire's death, William becomes the favorite child of their wealthy and powerful father, Baron Leopold, played by Charles Dance. Leopold is a famous and respected surgeon. He had originally married Claire because she came from a noble family and brought a large amount of money to the marriage through her dowry. Leopold controls almost every part of Victor's life. He decides what Victor will study, how he should behave, and even trains him to become a surgeon just like himself. Victor's hands are extremely important because they are supposed to become the hands of a great surgeon someday. Because of that, even the smallest mistakes are punished brutally, sometimes with his father hitting him in the face with a cane. Despite everything, Victor is deeply attached to his mother and struggles badly after losing her. After his mother's death and years of harsh treatment from his father, Victor grows into a brilliant but extremely arrogant surgeon. he becomes obsessed with the idea of using science to defeat death itself. Victor believes that his father allowed his mother to die and blames him for not saving her. But Leopold tells Victor that death is something no human being can ever truly defeat. Things get even worse for the family when two major fires and a revolt on their estate destroy much of their wealth. Eventually, Leopold dies as well. After their father's death, William is sent to live with another branch of the family in Vienna, while Victor travels first to London and later to Edinburgh to continue his studies and scientific work. In 1855, Victor is kicked out of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh after performing experiments on dead bodies and trying to bring corpses back to life. A disciplinary tribunal calls his experiments an act of sacrilege. A professor named Krempe, played by Ralph Ineson, oversees Victor's hearing. During the investigation, Victor actually manages to prove something incredible. His experiments show that reanimated corpses are capable of making decisions and responding to human interaction. Victor's work attracts the attention of a wealthy arms dealer named Henrik Harlander, played by Christoph Waltz. Harlander offers Victor unlimited financial support and gives him access to an isolated tower located beside a lake outside the city. This gives Victor the perfect place to continue his secret experiments away from everyone else. Victor asks his younger brother William to help him build the laboratory. While working with William, Victor becomes attracted to William's fiancée, Elizabeth, played by Mia Goth. Elizabeth is also Harlander's niece. At one point, Victor disguises himself as a priest and sits inside a church confession booth. Elizabeth comes to confess her feelings, not realizing that Victor is actually listening to her during her confession. Elizabeth reveals that she seriously dislikes Victor. She describes him as a controlling and tyrannical person who always wants to control everyone around him. Eventually, Elizabeth discovers that Victor tricked her. Even after that, the two still spend time together. They go out to lunch, and Elizabeth even dances with Victor. Since William is busy helping Victor build the laboratory, Victor gets more chances to spend time alone with Elizabeth. Victor eventually gathers the courage to propose marriage to her, but Elizabeth turns him down. Meanwhile, Harlander is becoming impatient. He gave Victor unlimited money and resources, but he wants to see actual results from his experiments. With pressure building, Victor begins collecting body parts from criminals who were executed by hanging and soldiers who were killed during the ongoing Crimean War. Using these body parts, Victor builds a massive human like creature. His plan is to bring the creature to life by using lightning and powerful electrical currents that will travel through its lymphatic system. As a massive storm approaches, Harlander reveals a shocking secret. He is dying from syphilis, and he wants Victor to put his brain inside the creature so that he can continue living in a new body. Victor refuses to do it. Harlander becomes furious and tries to sabotage Victor's experiment. During the struggle, Harlander falls to his death. Victor continues with the experiment. He sends a powerful electric current through the creature's body, but nothing seems to happen. At first, it looks like the experiment has completely failed. But the next morning, Victor discovers something incredible. The creature is alive. Victor begins teaching the creature how to face the sun and use sunlight to keep himself warm. He locks the creature in the basement and starts studying him. Victor is amazed by the creature's incredible physical strength and his ability to heal from injuries extremely quickly. However, Victor struggles to teach him how to speak. The only word the creature can say is Victor. Frustrated by the creature's slow progress, Victor starts treating him the same cruel way his own father treated him. He uses harsh discipline and violence in an attempt to force the creature to learn more words and understand things. This only makes the creature angry and more aggressive. Eventually, William and Elizabeth arrive. Elizabeth sees how Victor is treating the creature and immediately questions his cruel behavior. Instead of being afraid of the creature, Elizabeth starts to connect with him. She treats him with kindness and patiently teaches him how to speak her name. The creature eventually learns to say Elizabeth. Victor starts to notice something that makes him extremely uncomfortable. Elizabeth is beginning to develop feelings for the creature. Elizabeth tells Victor that Maybe the creature's heart is actually purer and more innocent than the heart of an ordinary human being. Victor doesn't like hearing that. He lies to William and tells him that the creature killed Harlander. Victor then sends William and Elizabeth away. After they leave, Victor sets fire to his laboratory while the creature is still trapped inside. But as Victor walks away, he hears the creature crying out his name. Something inside Victor changes. He suddenly regrets what he's doing and tries to go back inside the tower to save the creature. But it's too late, the tower explodes. Victor is badly injured, and his leg is so severely damaged that he eventually needs a prosthetic leg. As Victor finishes telling his story, the creature suddenly returns to the ship. He confronts Captain Anderson and begins telling his own side of the story. Part 2. The creature's tale. The creature survives the explosion and manages to break free from his chains. He escapes into the woods, but his troubles are far from over. Hunters spot him and start shooting at him. Trying to escape, the creature eventually hides inside the machinery of a nearby farm mill. From his hiding place, the creature secretly watches the family living on the farm. Over time, he becomes attached to them. Even though the family doesn't know he exists, the creature secretly starts helping them. He brings them huge amounts of firewood and even builds a pen for their sheep. The family is confused by all the mysterious help they are receiving. Since they don't know who their secret helper is, they start calling him the spirit of the forest. The family leaves gifts of clothing and food for this mysterious spirit. The creature secretly takes the gifts and becomes even more attached to the family. Eventually, the rest of the family leaves the farm for the winter. The creature is left alone with the family's elderly blind patriarch, played by David Bradley. Because the old man can't see him, the creature finally feels safe enough to approach him. The two form a friendship. The blind man teaches the creature how to read and how to speak properly. Through their conversations, the creature also learns about God and the story of how God created humanity. This makes the creature start asking a huge question: where did I come from? The creature struggles to remember his own past. He knows that something important happened to him, but he doesn't fully understand his origins. Eventually, he travels back to the ruins of Victor's old laboratory. There, he discovers the horrible truth. He learns that Victor Frankenstein created him. The creature also discovers information that leads him to Victor's estate. The creature returns to the farm, only to discover something terrible. The blind old man is being attacked by a pack of wolves. The creature jumps into action and fights the wolves, managing to save his friend. But the old man is badly injured and is dying. The creature stays with him and comforts him during his final moments. Then the hunters return. They see the creature near the dead old man and assume that the creature is responsible for his death. The hunters shoot the creature and apparently kill him. But the creature eventually comes back to life. That's when he realizes something terrifying. He can't die, and because he is different from everyone else, he may be forced to live forever completely alone. The creature becomes desperate for someone who can truly understand him. He confronts Victor on the night of William and Elizabeth's wedding. The creature asks Victor to create another being like himself, a companion who can stay with him so he won't have to spend eternity alone. But Victor refuses. Victor is terrified that if he creates another creature, the two might reproduce and create an entire new race of monsters. He absolutely refuses to help. The creature becomes furious and attacks Victor. During the chaos, Elizabeth hears what is happening and arrives at the scene. But instead of being terrified, Elizabeth embraces the creature when she sees him. Victor tries to shoot the creature, but things go horribly wrong. Victor accidentally shoots Elizabeth instead. William tries to rush toward the creature, but he is also mortally wounded. As William is dying, he looks at Victor and tells him that Victor is the real monster. The creature carries Elizabeth away to a cave, but she eventually dies from her injuries. Victor blames the creature and begins chasing him. The chase eventually takes them all the way to the Arctic. There, Victor and the creature face each other one final time. The creature tries to destroy himself using a stick of dynamite, hoping to finally end his endless existence. But the attempt fails. After everything they've been through, Victor finally realizes how much pain and suffering he has caused. Victor and the creature finally stop fighting. The two of them reconcile. Instead of seeing each other as enemies, they finally recognize their true relationship. Victor is the creator, the creature is his creation. They call each other father and son, but Victor's injuries are too severe. He eventually dies. With Victor gone, the creature uses his incredible strength to help free the ship from the thick Arctic ice. Captain Anderson finally realizes that his mission has become reckless and too dangerous. He decides to give up his pursuit of the North Pole and turn the ship around to head back home. The creature is left alone once again, but this time he carries something with him. He remembers the lesson Victor once taught him. The creature reaches toward the sunlight, embracing its warmth just as Victor taught him to do when he was first created. And as the ship sails away, the creature stands alone beneath the sun. Oscar Isaac as Baron Victor Frankenstein. Oscar Isaac embodies Baron Victor Frankenstein as a brilliant, egotistical surgeon whose obsession with conquering death stems from profound personal trauma and intellectual arrogance. In Guillermo del Toro's adaptation, Victor is expelled from the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh for attempting to reanimate corpses, an act denounced as sacrilege. He later receives funding from the wealthy arms merchant Heinrich Harlander to pursue his experiments in an isolated tower, assembling a body from battlefield remains of the Crimean War. Isaac's portrayal captures Victor as a misunderstood artist with punk rock energy rather than a traditional mad scientist. When Victor first enters his laboratory, he regards it as a stage, channeling a performative, provocative drive that fuels his ambition. Isaac's career prepared him uniquely for this role. His breakthrough as a struggling folk singer in the Coen brothers, Inside Levin Davis, earned him the National Society of Film Critics Best Actor Award and demonstrated his ability to convey quiet intensity and self sabotage. Subsequent work in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, Denis Villeneuve's Dune, Ex Machina, A Most Violent Year, and The Card Counter showcased range across blockbuster spectacle and intimate character studies. In Del Toro's film, Isaac draws on these experiences to depict Victor's duality: the tender son grieving his mother's death in childbirth, and the arrogant experimenter who replicates his father's cruelty when the creature fails to meet intellectual expectations. The performance highlights Victor's internal conflict as he teaches the creature only the word Victor, then grows fearful of its strength and sets the laboratory ablaze, only to attempt a remorseful rescue that costs him his leg. Del Toro has emphasized casting through the eyes, noting that Isaac's gaze conveys a man who believes he is doing good while remaining tortured by his choices. This visual approach aligns with the film's gothic aesthetic, influenced by Bernie Wrightson's illustrations, and allows Isaac to externalize Victor's Miltonian tragedy without excess dialogue. Critics have praised the performance as a standout, highlighting its visceral intimacy and the way Isaac balances egotism with eventual recognition of his own monstrosity. When William dying calls Victor a monster, and later when Victor and the creature reconcile as father and son, Isaac's physical and emotional transformation underscores the character's arc from creator to destroyed figure. The role demanded extensive preparation in period, medical knowledge, and physicality, particularly after the prosthetic leg sequences set in the Arctic frame narrative. Isaac's interpretation diverges from earlier screen Frankensteins, such as Colin Clive's energetic 1931 portrayal or Kenneth Branagh's more operatic 1994 version. Instead of pure hysteria, Isaac presents a rock star scientist whose isolation and ambition feel contemporary while remaining faithful to Mary Shelley's themes of hubris and abandoned responsibility. The casting choice reflects Del Toro's long held vision of a Miltonian tragedy, one he had developed for years before Netflix revived the project. Isaac's ability to hold the screen opposite both intimate family scenes and large scale creation sequences makes him the emotional anchor of the 150-minute film. Jacob Elordi. As the creature, Jacob Elordi's physical and emotional transformation into the creature represents one of the most significant casting decisions in recent Gothic cinema. Standing well over 6 feet, Elodie possesses the imposing stature required for a being assembled from battlefield corpses, Yet, he brings an unexpected innocence and vulnerability that Del Toro specifically sought. The director has stated that the creature needed eyes conveying pure innocence, and Elordi's gaze fulfills that requirement even beneath extensive prosthetic makeup designed in a compressed 9-week period after Andrew Garfield's departure due to scheduling conflicts stemming from the SAG after strikes. Elordi's path to the role was unconventional. A hairstylist who worked with him on Sofia Coppola's Priscilla recommended him to Del Toro. On the Priscilla set, Elordi had jokingly claimed he was already cast in Frankenstein. The joke became reality. Previously known for Euphoria, Saltburn, which earned him a BAFTA nomination, The Sweet East, and O Canada, Elordi used the part as a personal reset. He has described the creature's journey of rebuilding identity as mirroring his own need to reinvent himself as an actor, reigniting his passion for filmmaking. In the film, the creature begins as a nearly mute creation capable of only the word Victor. After surviving the laboratory explosion, he finds refuge in a family's mill, secretly aiding them as the spirit of the forest. The blind patriarch teaches him language and literacy, allowing the creature to discover the truth of his origins and confront Victor at William and Elizabeth's wedding. Elordi's performance moves from childlike curiosity to articulate rage and profound loneliness. Key sequences include the creature's bonding with Elizabeth, who teaches him her name, his demand for a companion, and the final Arctic reconciliation in which he and Victor address each other as father and son. The physical demands were extreme: rapid healing, immense strength, and prolonged prosthetic application required collaboration with makeup artist Mike Hill and the visual effects team. Critical response has singled out Elordi as spellbinding. Oscar Isaac himself called the performance spellbinding. And reviewers have noted how Elordi humanizes the creature without diminishing its otherness. Comparisons to Boris Karloff's iconic 1931 portrayal are inevitable, where Karloff conveyed tragic emptiness through minimal dialogue and expressive physicality. Elodie expands the emotional range while retaining the sense of something obscenely alive, a quality Del Toro has long admired in Christopher Lee's Hammer films. The casting also marks a deliberate shift from earlier plans that involved Doug Jones and designs based on Wrightson's art. Elodie's height necessitated redesigns, yet the final result preserves the emptiness and Miltonian dimension Del Toro sought. Elodie's work elevates the dual narrative structure. The creature's tale, told after Victor's, reframes the entire story through the perspective of the abandoned creation, emphasizing themes of isolation, the desire for companionship, and the impossibility of death. The performance's success lies in its restraint. Even in moments of violence, Elodie never loses the underlying yearning for connection that defines Shelley's original text. Mia Goth as Lady Elizabeth Harlander and Baroness Claire Frankenstein. Mia Goth undertakes the dual role of Lady Elizabeth Harlander, William's fiancée and the object of Victor's affections, and Baroness Claire Frankenstein, the mother who dies giving birth to William. This casting choice allows Goth to bookend Victor's emotional life, the lost maternal ideal, and the living woman who ultimately chooses empathy for the creature over loyalty to the Frankenstein family. In the film, Elizabeth questions Victor's treatment of the creature, bonds with it, and is accidentally shot by Victor while attempting to protect it. She dies in the creature's arms in a cave, a sequence that crystallizes the film's tragic core. Goth's previous work made her an ideal fit. Her dual performance as Maxine and Pearl in T. West's X trilogy demonstrated an ability to inhabit contrasting personas within the same narrative universe. Roles in Suspiria, High Life, Infinity Pool, A Cure for Wellness, and Emma further established her as an actress comfortable with heightened gothic and psychological material. For Frankenstein, she has spoken of finding the character through costume and set, noting that she only fully connected once wardrobe and environment aligned. Parallels between her own experience and Elizabeth's journey of authentic selfhood emerged during production. Del Toro's decision to cast Goth in both mother and potential daughter-in-law roles deepens the Oedipal and cyclical themes. Claire's death in childbirth sets Victor on his path of resentment toward his father and obsession with defeating mortality. Elizabeth's later rejection of Victor's advances and her instinctive kindness toward the creature complete a circle of female figures who either inspire or critique Victor's ambitions. Gau's performance balances self assurance with ironic empathy, presenting Elizabeth as a woman who sees the world's ugliness yet refuses to abandon compassion. The dual casting also allows visual and emotional echoes between the two women, reinforcing the film's meditation on creation, loss, and the cost of playing God. Christoph Waltz as Heinrich Harlander. Christoph Waltz plays Heinrich or Heinrich Harlander, a wealthy arms merchant funding Victor's experiments, while dying of syphilis and secretly intending to have his own brain transplanted into the creature's body. When Victor refuses, Harlander attempts sabotage and falls to his death. The character is an invention of the film, expanding the novel's supporting world to include the commercial and military interests of the Crimean War era. Waltz's two Academy Awards for Inglorious Bastards and Django Unchained established him as a master of charismatic menace. His subsequent roles in the French Dispatch, Downsizing, Alita, Battle Angel, and as Blofeld in the James Bond films, along with voice work as Count Volpe in Del Toro's Pinocchio, demonstrate versatility across registers of sophistication and threat. In Frankenstein, he and Del Toro treated the character as a living process, adjusting details on set rather than adhering rigidly to the page. Waltz's performance conveys a man of refined tastes whose patronage masks desperate self preservation. The role requires both courtly charm when offering Victor unlimited resources and grotesque physical decline as the syphilis advances. Harlander's presence grounds the story in historical materialism. His arms dealing links Victor's pure scientific ambition to the brutal realities of war that supply the raw materials for the creature. Waltz's ability to make even secondary characters indelible ensures that Harlander's death carries weight, precipitating the laboratory crisis, and Victor's subsequent lies about the creature's responsibility. Felix Kammerer as William Frankenstein. Felix Kammerer portrays William Frankenstein, Victor's younger brother, and the family's golden child engaged to Elizabeth. Kammerer drew inspiration from Del Toro's accounts of his own relationship with his brother, finding biographical resonance in the script's depiction of sibling distance and eventual reunion. William assists in building the laboratory, discovers Harlander's body, and is mortally wounded at his own wedding while trying to intervene against the creature. His dying word monster, directed at Victor, crystallizes the film's moral inversion. Camera's affable presence and quiet intensity make William more than a plot device. He represents the life Victor might have led had he not been consumed by ambition, and his death forces Victor to confront the human cost of his creation. The casting of a relatively fresh face alongside established stars allows William to feel authentic and grounded within the film's heightened Gothic world. Charles Dance as Baron Leopold Frankenstein. Charles Dance brings formidable authority to the role of Baron Leopold Frankenstein, Victor's cold and controlling father, a renowned physician himself. Leopold favors the younger William and subjects Victor to a harsh, performance driven upbringing. Dance's long career, including iconic turns as Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones and roles in films such as Gosford Park and The Imitation Game, makes him ideally suited to portray aristocratic severity and emotional repression. Leopold's influence lingers throughout the story, even after his limited screen time. His rigid expectations and favoritism plant the seeds of Victor's resentment and obsessive drive. Dance's performance conveys the weight of generational trauma with minimal dialogue, relying on posture, gaze, and measured delivery to establish the emotional climate of the Frankenstein household. David Bradley as the blind man. David Bradley appears as the blind man, the elderly patriarch who befriends the creature during his time living near the family's farm. Unable to see the creature's appearance, the blind man teaches him to read and speak fluently, offering the first genuine human connection the creature experiences. Bradley, a frequent collaborator with Del Toro, having voiced Geppetto in Pinocchio and appeared in The Strain, brings warmth, wisdom, and quiet dignity to the role. The sequences between the creature and the blind man form one of the film's most moving passages. Bradley's performance emphasizes patience and openness, contrasting sharply with the fear and rejection the creature encounters from the sighted world. When wolves attack and the family later mistakes the creature for a murderer, the loss of this relationship deepens the creature's isolation and propels him toward confrontation with Victor Lars Mikkelsen as Captain Anderson. Lars Mikkelsen plays Captain Anderson, the commander of the Danish ship trapped in Arctic ice, who discovers the injured Victor and later hears both men's stories. Mikkelsen's measured intensity, familiar from roles in House of Cards, The Witcher, and Ahsoka, anchors the frame narrative. Anderson serves as the audience's surrogate, a rational man confronted with an extraordinary tale who must decide whether to continue his polar expedition or turn back. His final decision to free the ship and sail home after witnessing the reconciliation between Victor and the creature provides a quiet note of hard won understanding. Mikkelsen's performance balances authority with humanity, ensuring the frame story feels essential rather than ornamental. Christian Convery, as young Victor Christian Convery, portrays the young Victor Frankenstein, a boy shaped by an abusive father and the early loss of his mother, Convery. Known for Sweet Tooth and other projects, captures both the arrogance and the underlying tenderness that Del Toro identified in the character. These early scenes establish the psychological roots of Victor's later obsessions and allow the audience to understand the adult Victor's contradictions. Supporting cast and ensemble texture. The supporting ensemble further enriches the world. Ralph Ineson appears as Professor Kremp, overseeing Victor's hearing at the Royal College. Bern Gorman plays an executioner who supplies remains. Nikolai Likas is Chief Officer Larson. Kyle Gatehouse, Lauren Collins, and Sofia Galasso portray members of the farming family who unknowingly benefit from the creature's help. These roles, though smaller, receive the same careful attention characteristic of Del Toro's ensembles. Del Toro's casting philosophy centers on the eyes and on the ability to project a completed performance. Casting director Robin D. Cook has noted that while she sees possibility, Del Toro sees the finished product. This approach explains the mix of established prestige actors, rising international talents, and genre veterans comfortable with practical effects and emotional extremes. The ensemble reflects the film's dual structure. Victor's tale requires actors capable of intellectual fire and moral ambiguity. The creature's tale demands performers who can convey quiet humanity and sudden violence. The production scale allowed for this caliber of casting. Practical makeup, large sets, and Alexander Desplat's a score further support the performances. The result is an ensemble in which every major role feels fully inhabited, each actor contributing distinct textures to Del Toro's long gestating vision of Shelley's novel as a tragedy of creation, abandonment, and hard won recognition between father and son. The casting choices collectively ensure that the film's gothic spectacle never overwhelms its human core. Frankenstein 2025 production, release, and reception production development and pre-production. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein is not a project born in 2023 or even in the 2010s. Its roots go back almost 2 decades to a moment when Del Toro was still building his reputation as one of the industry's most distinctive genre filmmakers. In 2007, he described a faithful Milton inflected version of Mary Shelley's 1818 novel as the movie he would kill to make. Pointing specifically to Frank Darabont's unproduced but widely admired script for Kenneth Branagh's 1994 film, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, as a template for the kind of seriousness he wanted to bring to the material. By January 2008, Del Toro was already sketching concept art intended to shape the visual world of a future film, and he had begun making notes toward a script. That process stalled when the 2007-08 Writers Guild of America strike halted much of the industry. A month later, in a separate interview, he laid out his creative philosophy for the adaptation in more detail. Rather than restage the classical myth wholesale, he wanted to fuse elements of Frankenstein and its 1935 sequel Bride of Frankenstein into something new. He singled out two prior screen performances as the poles he was working between. Christopher Lee's Hammer Films version of The Creature, which he felt captured a sense of something obscenely alive, and Boris Karloff's original 1931 portrayal, which he credited with nailing the character's tragic dimension. Later that same year, the project found an institutional home. In September 2008, Del Toro signed a 3 year first look deal with Universal Pictures that bundled Frankenstein together with several other passion projects he was attached to direct, including adaptations of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5, and the Dan Simmons novel Drood. Around this period, Del Toro named illustrator Bernie Wrightson's stark, densely inked 1983 Frankenstein illustrations as a key visual touchstone and stated plainly that his film would not function as a literal page to screen adaptation of Shelley's text, but rather as what he called an adventure story built around the creature. He hoped Wrightson himself would design his version of the monster. Despite the deal being in place, momentum was slow. In 2009, Del Toro said publicly that production was unlikely to start for at least 4 years, and yet, in a sign of how attached he already was to the project, he had cast his frequent collaborator Doug Jones as the creature and had begun makeup and prosthetic tests with him. Jones later revealed that the film was ultimately shelved because of Universal's evolving plans for what would become its Dark Universe initiative, the studio's attempt to build a shared cinematic universe out of its classic monster properties. Dracula, the Mummy, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein's monster among them. At Comic Con in the summer of 2010, Del Toro told the outlet Collider that Shelley's novel was his favorite book in the world, underlining just how personal the eventual shelving of the project must have felt. The film resurfaced periodically in interviews throughout the 2010s without ever moving into production. In 2013, Del Toro expressed interest in casting Benedict Cumberbatch as the creature. The following year, he confirmed that Universal chairperson Donna Langley had approached him more than once about reviving the project, but that he had held back explicitly because of how much the story meant to him personally. He referred to it as his dream project, a phrase that recurs across multiple interviews spanning more than a decade. In 2016, he reflected candidly on the psychological weight of finally making a film he had circled for so long, comparing the moment of release to a competitor stepping onto an Olympic stage. Once you've made the attempt, you're judged on the result, whether it lands or not, and the dream itself is used up in the process. In 2020, while promoting his film Antlers, Del Toro floated an entirely different structural idea. If properly funded, he suggested he might adapt Frankenstein as a 2 or 3 film saga, citing the novel's structural complexity and its shifting narrative perspectives. The story is told, in Shelley's original, through nested first person accounts from an Arctic explorer, Victor Frankenstein, and the creature itself. That multi film version never materialized, but the idea illustrates how seriously Del Toro was still treating the source material even as the project sat dormant. The decisive turn came in 2023. Del Toro had by then signed a multi year, multi project deal with Netflix, and following the Best Animated Feature win for Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio at the 95th Academy Awards, Netflix committed to backing Frankenstein as a live action feature with Del Toro writing and directing. Early reporting named Andrew Garfield, Oscar Isaac, and Mia Goth as actors in talks for roles, with Garfield initially attached to play the creature. By September 2023, Del Toro confirmed filming was targeted for February 2024 and that Christoph Waltz had joined the cast. Then, in January 2024, the casting shifted again. Jacob Elordi replaced Garfield in the role of the creature. The change was reported to stem from scheduling conflicts tied to the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike, which had compressed and rearranged production calendars across the industry. Elordi's path to the role had an almost accidental origin. A hairstylist who had worked with him on Priscilla 2023 recommended him to Del Toro, and Elordi himself later recalled having half joked on the set of that earlier film about eventually landing the part. The recasting came at real creative cost. Del Toro had already spent 9 months designing a version of the creature's look built around Garfield's proportions. With Garfield's exit, he had only about 9 weeks to redesign the character for Elodie, who is notably taller, a compressed timeline he later described as an intense creative pressure test. Around the same period, Felix Kammerer, Lars Mikkelsen, David Bradley, Christian Convery, and Charles Dance joined the ensemble. Dance's casting carried a small note of continuity for genre fans. He had previously played Victor Frankenstein's father in the unrelated 2015 film Victor Frankenstein, and would do so again here in Del Toro's version. In April 2024, Del Toro announced that Ralph Ineson had joined the cast for what he called a pivotal cameo appearance, without disclosing the role at the time. Del Toro has also spoken about the deeper, almost spiritual roots of his attachment to the character, tracing it back Catholic childhood. He has said that growing up in a devoutly religious household in Mexico, he struggled to connect with the concept of sainthood as it was presented to him until he encountered Boris Karloff's performance as the creature on screen, which gave him, in his words, his first real understanding of what a saint or a messiah might actually look like. That framing recurs throughout his public comments about the project. The creature, for Del Toro, was never simply a horror movie monster, but something closer to a suffering, sanctified figure, an idea that shaped both the tone of the screenplay and the sympathetic way the film ultimately treats its central creation. He has cited James Whale's original 1931 Frankenstein as a formative influence in this respect and said his own film draws on Whale's 1935 follow up Bride of Frankenstein as well. Beyond the Universal monster movies themselves, Del Toro has named a cluster of classic Hollywood Gothic romances as touchstones for the film's visual and emotional tone, including Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, 1940, William Wyler's Wuthering Heights, 1939, Joseph L. Mankiewicz's Dragonwyck, 1946, and Charles Frank's Uncle Silas, 1947. Discussing his overall approach to adapting a text so heavily adapted before him, Del Toro articulated a guiding philosophy about myth versus canon. Once a story like Frankenstein, Pinocchio, Dracula, or Sherlock Holmes becomes a genuine cultural myth, he argued, the myth grows larger than any single original text, and any version made with sincerity and personal conviction is just as faithful as a more literal adaptation, fixating on canonical accuracy. In his view, is a creatively paralyzing trap. Oscar Isaac, cast as Victor Frankenstein, described the tonal register he and Del Toro were aiming for as fundamentally European material, filtered through a Latin American and Mexican Catholic sensibility, which he said translated into heightened, constant emotional intensity on set. Filming principal photography began on February 12, 2024, based out of Toronto, Canada, and continued through September 30 of that year. A shooting schedule of more than 7 months, reflecting both the film's scale and the practical effects heavy nature of the production. Toronto served as the primary production base, consistent with Del Toro's history of shooting large scale genre projects in and around the city. The production also traveled to the United Kingdom for additional location work in September 2024. Crews filmed along the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, transforming the historic street for the production. At Hospital Field House, a historic property in Arbroath, Angus, Scotland, and at Burghley House, a grand Elizabethan country house in Stamford, Lincolnshire, which was closed to the public during Netflix's filming there. These UK locations contributed to the film's period texture, standing in for the story's 19th century European settings. Del Toro was explicit during and after production that he did not consider the film a horror movie in any conventional sense, despite its subject matter and gothic imagery. He described it instead as an intensely emotional story, a framing he repeated in multiple interviews as the film moved toward release. That emphasis on emotional and familial drama over shock or scares became a consistent thread in how both Del Toro and his cast talked about the finished film. Isaac's comments about the story's Catholic melodramatic intensity point in the same direction, positioning the film as a tragedy about fathers and sons as much as a monster story. Post-production stretched from the fall of 2024 through much of 2025, encompassing editing, visual effects, and the extensive practical makeup work the film required to bring Elordi's version of the creature to the screen. Evan Schiff served as editor on the film, shaping a final cut that runs 150 minutes. The creature's physical design, leaned heavily on practical prosthetic makeup rather than being driven purely by digital effects, continuing Del Toro's long standing preference for tactile in camera creature work. Mike Hill led the special makeup effects, working alongside Megan Many. The makeup and hairstyling team, more broadly included Jordan Samuel and Cleona Fure, credited across multiple award nominations for period hair and character makeup design. Visual effects work was overseen by a supervising team that included Dennis Berardi, Io Burgess, Ivan Busquets, and Jose Granel, handling the effects work needed to support and extend the practical creature design, along with period environments and effects sequences, such as the Arctic ship in the ice framing story. Production design fell to Tamara Deverell, with set decoration by Shane Vio, a combination that would go on to receive some of the film's most consistent awards recognition during the following year's Film Awards season. Costume design was handled by Kate Hawley, whose work on the film's Victorian inflected wardrobe was likewise singled out repeatedly once the film reached audiences and critics. Dan Lawson, Del Toro's regular cinematographer on projects including Crimson Peak and The Shape of Water, shot the film, continuing a collaboration that has become one of the more recognizable director cinematographer pairings in contemporary studio filmmaking. Music in January 2025, it was confirmed that Alexandre Desplat had composed the film score, marking his third collaboration with Del Toro following The Shape of Water 2017 and Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio 2022. Desplat, discussing the project in a May 2025 interview tied to the Cannes Film Festival, described Del Toro's filmmaking as fundamentally lyrical and said he intended to match that quality rather than lean into conventionally horrific scoring. His explicit goal, in his own words, was music that stayed lyrical and emotional rather than frightening. He also described the score conceptually as the third movement in a triptych alongside his two earlier Del Toro collaborations, characterizing it as a long, slow building movement, an adagio that develops gradually rather than announcing itself all at once. The score was recorded at Abbey Road Studios in London during 2025. Frankenstein, soundtrack from the Netflix film, was released digitally through Netflix Music on November 7, 2025, the same day the film debuted on the streaming platform, running just under 1 hour and 45 minutes in length. Ahead of the film's release, Del Toro also offered a telling reference point for the mood he wanted at a Netflix promotional event in Los Angeles. Early footage from Frankenstein was shown set to a piece of temp music borrowed from a different film entirely. The late Polish composer Wojciech Kilar's score for Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula. The choice signaled the kind of grand, romantic, tragedy-inflected register Del Toro was reaching for well before audiences heard Desplat's finished score. Release, theatrical Frankenstein had its world premiere in the main competition lineup of the 82nd Venice International Film Festival on August 30, 2025, placing it among that year's most closely watched award season contenders straight out of the gate. It went on to play a rapid circuit of major festivals that autumn. The film's North American premiere came at the Toronto International Film Festival, where it screened as part of the Special Presentations program on September 8, 2025. 10 days later, on September 18, it screened in the gala presentation section of the 30th Busan International Film Festival in South Korea. In October, it was selected as a headline gala presentation at the 69th BFI London Film Festival, screening on October 13, 2025. The film also had a dedicated Mexican premiere at the Morelia International Film Festival, notable given Del Toro's own Mexican background and Isaac's comments about the film's Latin American emotional register. Netflix opened the film in what was officially described as select theaters starting October 17, 2025, including a limited number of screenings on traditional 35mm film and in IMAX. Reporting closer to the release date clarified just how limited that footprint actually was. IMAX's own CEO indicated the format run would amount to roughly 10 screenings at a small number of locations, while broader tracking of the theatrical rollout found the film playing on approximately 400 screens nationwide during its run. well short of the more than one, zero screens that had reportedly been discussed earlier in the film's marketing plans. The theatrical engagement was structured as a short exclusive window, roughly 3 weeks, running from October 17 through the start of November, ahead of the Netflix streaming debut on November 7. In Mexico, the theatrical release was distributed through Pimienta Films. Home Media Frankenstein's primary home release was, by design, Netflix's own streaming platform. The film became available to Netflix subscribers worldwide on November 7, 2025, immediately following the close of its brief theatrical run. As a Netflix original, it did not receive an initial traditional retail DVD or Blu ray release in the way a conventional theatrical studio picture would. A more traditional physical media release did eventually materialize, aimed at collectors and cinephiles rather than the mass market. On February 23, 2026, Variety reported that Frankenstein would be added to the Criterion Collection, the prestige home video label known for curating classic and contemporary art house and genre cinema, releasing the news alongside word that the animated hit K-pop Demon Hunters was joining the same collection. Reception box office, because Frankenstein was designed from the outset as a Netflix streaming release with only a brief, deliberately limited theatrical window. Conventional box office figures for the film are unusually small relative to its budget and eventual audience size. Netflix invested roughly $120 million in the production, a substantial outlay for what is fundamentally a gothic literary drama rather than an action tentpole, but the studio was never trying to recoup that investment through ticket sales. During its 3 week limited theatrical run across roughly 400 US screens, the film grossed a reported $422,705 domestically, according to contemporaneous box office tracking. Other financial trackers cited figures in the range of roughly $480,000 to $655,000 once additional territories and reporting periods were factored in, reflecting the patchy and partial nature of box office data for a film Netflix was not treating as a traditional theatrical release. Netflix itself did not disclose full box office receipts for the run. The far more meaningful performance metric for a film like this is streaming viewership, and on that front, Frankenstein performed strongly. Netflix reported that the film drew roughly 29 million views in its first 3 days of global availability, making it the platform's fifth biggest English language film debut of 2025 up to that point, trailing only a handful of other major releases, including Tom Hardy's Havoc. It topped Netflix's global film chart for the week ending November 9, 2025, and reportedly ranked number one in 85 countries, with only a small number of territories where it placed second or third. Within Del Toro's own filmography on the platform, the debut easily outpaced his prior Netflix work. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio had debuted to 8 million views, and his anthology series Cabinet of Curiosities had opened to 6.6 million. Critical response: Frankenstein was, by most measures, a critical success. On the review aggregation site Rotten Tomatoes, 85% of 370 critics' reviews were classified as positive. The site's collected critical consensus credited the film with finding real humanity in one of cinema's most recognizable monsters, framing it as a lavish, large scale production whose most energizing element was Jacob Elordi's central performance. On Metacritic, which calculates a weighted average score rather than a simple positive negative split, the film received a score of 78 out of 100 based on 58 critics, a result the site characterizes as generally favorable. Critics repeatedly reached for comparisons to earlier Gothic romances rather than straightforward horror pictures, describing the film's sensibility as closer to romantic melodrama than to shock cinema, pointing to Del Toro's own Crimson Peak 2015, as well as Neil Jordan's interview with the Vampire 1994 and Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula 1992 as useful reference points for its heightened, opulent visual and emotional register. Several major reviews leaned strongly positive. Alyssa Wilkinson of the New York Times named the film a critic's pick, arguing that Del Toro's version fully embraces the novel's deep debt to Milton's Paradise Lost while stamping it with his own directorial signature. reshaping Shelley's narrative skeleton into a very Del Toro specific story about monstrous fathers and the sons they fail, while still honoring the emotional core of the source text. David Rooney, writing for The Hollywood Reporter out of the film's Venice premiere, described it as a visually opulent retelling that moves past horror entirely into the territory of grand romantic tragedy, suggesting that its emotional fidelity to Shelley's novel matters more than literal plot fidelity. Empire's Jamie Graham gave the film 4 stars out of 5, calling it an unusually faithful rendition of Shelley's novel that also succeeds as a deeply personal gothic romance, blending the book's core themes with Del Toro's familiar fairy tale and body horror instincts into a single cohesive whole. Glenn Kenny of RogerEbert.com went furthest of all, awarding the film a perfect score and mounting a vigorous defense of its fidelity to Shelley's underlying philosophy, arguing that Del Toro's transposition of the story into a more fantastical Victorian setting actually deepens rather than dilutes the humanity at the story's center. Other critics were more measured, even while still broadly positive. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian awarded the film 3 stars out of 5. While praising its bold decision to foreground the creature's own perspective, he argued that its lush, reverent take on Victorian period aesthetics ultimately softens the story's rawer philosophical horror, avoiding the more transgressive edge he associates with other versions of the tale. Ava Elizabeth Jenkins, reviewing for the Daily Tar Heel, offered a more mixed assessment, arguing that specific structural choices, aging up the Victor Frankenstein character and reshaping Elizabeth's role in the story, undercut some of the emotional weight of Shelley's original narrative. Even as she still described the film overall as a beautifully rendered, horrific reinterpretation. Variety's Peter De Bruges struck a similar balance, crediting Del Toro's version with hewing closer to Shelley's original intentions than most prior screen adaptations, particularly in its sympathetic treatment of creation and purpose, while arguing that the film's structure and lengthy runtime ultimately work against it, diffusing the concentrated philosophical charge of the novel across too much screen time. Beyond professional critics, general audiences responded even more emphatically. On Rotten Tomatoes' separate audience scoring system, the film reached a 95% approval rating, which stood as the highest audience score of Del Toro's entire directing career at the time, surpassing his previous best, Pan's Labyrinth, at 91% and his Oscar winning Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio at 90%. Among the rest of his feature filmography, only a handful of titles had ever cracked 80% with audiences, including The Devil's Backbone and Pacific Rim, making Frankenstein's reception a clear outlier even by the standards of a filmmaker with an unusually devoted fan base. The film also became an immediate commercial focal point for Netflix itself, sitting atop the platform's U.S. top 10 chart within days of its release, alongside catalog titles and other new releases. Taken together, the range of critical opinion coalesced around a fairly consistent overall picture. Reviewers largely agreed that Del Toro had made an ambitious, visually sumptuous, and emotionally sincere Gothic epic that prioritizes the spiritual and emotional truth of Shelley's novel over strict plot fidelity, with the primary point of disagreement being whether that trade off strengthened the material or diluted its darker, more transgressive edges. The film's critical standing was reinforced by year end recognition from major American critical bodies. Both the National Board of Review and the American Film Institute named it one of the 10 best films of 2025, and it went on to receive substantial recognition during the following awards season, including multiple nominations at the Golden Globes and the Academy Awards, with particular consensus forming around Elordi's performance as the film's standout element. Halloween is coming around, and as is usually the case, that means I'm watching far more horror movies than I would under normal circumstances. Among those I've watched lately are two recent adaptations of one of my favorite books, Frankenstein. Both shared the same title as the novel, and both were made for TV productions, and both came out in 2004. One was a USA adaptation based on a concept from Dean Koontz that he developed into a series of novels, which featured both the Doctor and his creation alive in modern day New Orleans. The doctor is up to his older tricks again, except this time he's killing people and harvesting their organs. And the monster taking on the name Deucalion, the son of Prometheus in Greek mythology, and Shelley's novel originally carried the subtitle of The Modern Prometheus, teams up with a police detective to stop his creator. It was intended to be the pilot for a new TV series with Vincent Perez, The Crow, City of Angels as Deucalion, but that fell through. I've never read the books, but it was an interesting take on the mythos. The other was also in 2004, a mini series that was an adaptation of the novel for the Hallmark Channel. It was a pretty faithful adaptation, albeit a bit slow in parts. The total runtime was around 3 hours. Luke Goss, Blade 2, played the monster, and William Hurt and Donald Sutherland also had supporting roles. Anyway, I got to thinking about the creature's name. Of course, anyone who has read the book and most adaptations of the novel know that Frankenstein was the doctor's name and the monster had no name. I've heard that Shelley referred to the creature as Adam in some readings of the book, and the creature refers to himself as the Adam of Frankenstein's labors. But for the most part, as far as the text is concerned, the creature is nameless. Over time, the monster has come to be known as Frankenstein in the public consciousness, which has become a sticking point for some who feel the need to issue a correction. This got me thinking, who's to say the creature isn't Frankenstein? I think of this for two reasons. For one, the creature refers to Frankenstein as his father. So, in that instance, Frankenstein could be considered the creature's surname as well as Victor's. In that case, it's only a first name that the creature lacks. Although you could make an argument for Adam to be his first name, and there have been works that use the creature and refer to him as Adam. If you don't want to think of the creature as Victor's son, you could also make an alternate argument. A painting is sometimes referred to by using the creator's name as shorthand, like a Rembrandt or a Monet. In this convention, Frankenstein's monster could be referred to as a Frankenstein. I think the best argument is really that the creature is Victor's son. He is a very human character in the book, not at all a lumbering monosyllabic buffoon like he's sometimes portrayed. No, the creature is actually very intelligent and well spoken. So, personally, I don't see anything wrong with humanizing him a bit further and referring to him as Frankenstein, since he is Frankenstein's son. 2025 forward. Indie's Book of the Year honorable mention. It's alive. Again, Frankenstein Lives brings to life the enduring legacy of Mary Shelley's creature in thrilling images and captivating commentary. Beginning with the story of Mary Shelley's conception of the novel on a stormy night on the shores of Lake Geneva, Frankenstein Lives traces the creature's transformation from a nameless literary monster to an international sensation, appearing in films, television shows, and commercial merchandise. The creature has even appeared on a cereal box. Frankenstein's monster has been a hero and a villain, a star in both comedies and dramas. He has gone head to head with both Dracula and the Wolfman, tap danced with Gene Wilder, joked around with Abbott and Costello, served as the butler for the Addams family, and continues to star in films today. With special attention placed on the 1931 film starring Boris Karloff, staggering through the mad scientist laboratory, the book explores the classic and often misunderstood character. This visual guide includes photos of Shelley's manuscript pages, Boris Karloff on set as the creature in the 1931 film, and much more. Frankenstein Lives brings the history to life, including Mary Shelley's classic of Gothic horror, a cautionary tale of the limits of creativity that introduced the world to one of the most iconic monsters in literary history. Now, a major motion picture by Oscar winning writer director Guillermo del Toro, starring Oscar Isaac, Jacob Elordi, and Mia Goth, obsessed with creating life. Victor Frankenstein plunders graveyards for the material to fashion a new being, which he shocks into life with electricity. But his botched creature, rejected by Frankenstein and denied human companionship, sets out to destroy his maker and all that he holds dear. This chilling Gothic tale, begun when Mary Shelley was just 19 years old, would become the world's most famous work of horror fiction and is now the inspiration of a film adaptation written and directed by Guillermo del Toro and starring Oscar Isaac, Jacob Elordi, and Mia Goth. Movie review in the beginning. His beginning. all was void without form. Darkness covered endless eternity. And then light breath, sinews twitch, muscles stretch, blood sweeps through unfamiliar veins, coursing through cast off organs and patchwork limbs, a step tentative and awkward. Another across stone through halls, step by step, and then he finds him, his father, his creator. So pleased Victor seems at first, and the creature longs to please. Victor, the creator says, Victor, the creature repeats again and again. Victor, benefactor, protector, all. The creature sees no one else, knows nothing else. Victor gives the creature a coat to ward off the cold, and the creature is grateful. Victor shackles the creature in chains, and the creature is confused. But soon he accepts it all, the chains, the cold, the sameness of it all, as normal. But if the creature's world is a steady stream of same, Victor is week by week changing, growing angrier, more frustrated. He wants something more from his creation, a sign of sparking intelligence, of growing ability, even simply a new spoken word. Something beyond Victor, but no new word comes, no matter how much Victor shouts or berates or hits. And the creature, bigger, stronger, begins to feel something new inside, beyond love and gratitude and confusion. He feels anger, and then, like a vision, another being enters the creature's bone cold prison. Tender, beautiful, compassionate. She walks to him and touches his hands. She presses his fingers to her throat as she says her name. Elizabeth, when the creature sees Victor again, Victor comes carrying a tank of a sharp smelling liquid, splashing and spreading it around the creature's dungeon like home. Again, Victor demands a new word from the creature, and finally, as Victor is about to leave, the creature gives it. Elizabeth, he says, shyly, slyly, but the word does nothing to check Victor's rage. Hearing the word, it may even grow. And then that rage takes form in fire, loud and bright and bringing death. The creature, terrified, pulls at his chains, desperate to be free. Note, the following sections contain spoiler. Positive elements. Guillermo del Toro has a soft spot for outcast monsters. See, Hellboy, The Shape of Water, and in his eyes, the creature is the real hero of Frankenstein. That's not without reason. When the creature escapes, he shows a capacity for kindness when given the chance. And his best chance comes when he spends several months hiding in a mill house belonging to a rural family. Though he never reveals himself to the whole family, he listens in as a blind grandfather teaches his granddaughter how to read and spell. The creature feels a deep affinity for the family, and he becomes a secret benefactor to them, gathering wood, fixing pens, and serving as something of a family guardian. Eventually, most of the family leaves, and the grandfather is left alone. But the blind man also realizes that he is not really alone. He's heard the creature's scrapings and bumpings for months, and he invites the creature to introduce himself. Make this your home and be my friend, he says. And the two spend the next several weeks together in pleasant companionship. The creature later reminisces about this time as the best of his troubled life, when he was a first hand witness to goodwill and kindness. As the movie goes on, the creature shows his own version of goodness and kindness to others. Both Victor Frankenstein and the creature eventually find their way past the Arctic Circle, where the movie in fact opens, and they meet a Russian sea captain leading an expedition to the North Pole. The captain proves to be a good listener, and he is very protective of the people in his care, even when common sense would tell him to take another route. Spiritual elements. Frankenstein teams with spiritual themes, Christian and otherwise. And we begin with the movie's tagline: Only a monster would play God. That monster, as you might have guessed, is Victor Frankenstein. The movie tells us that Victor grew up as a rather moody child, spurned by his father, Europe's most celebrated surgeon, but deeply attached to his mother. When his parents argued, he would sometimes pray to a wooden angel. But in his dreams, that angel, a dark angel, as described by Victor later, visited him and inspired him to seek out the secrets of life itself. Years later, in Edinburgh, Scotland's famous medical school, an adult, Victor conducts a macabre but impressive lecture demonstrating what he's learned. He displays a caustically dismissive attitude toward God as he does so. He believes that science can conquer death and thus correct God's mistakes. The school's conservative and more pious leaders shout him down and expel him, but that's no deterrent to young Victor. The movie emphasizes something we wrote about in a recent blog: what classic movie monsters can teach us about the seven deadly sins. Frankenstein is an embodiment of the deadly sin of pride. Years later, Victor regrets his forays into life and death, saying that once he created the creature, he found it unnatural. When someone asks what manner of devil made him, Victor says, I did. If Victor seems to desire to challenge God through science, Elizabeth, the fiancée of Victor's brother, William, sees God's design through it. She says as much, pointing out the symmetry and shapes in insects as proof. She wears a cross and goes to confession. And when Elizabeth sees the creature, she sees not a monstrosity, but something far more innocent and pure than the rest of mankind. Perhaps she believes that the creature is somehow untainted by the doctrine of original sin, but her thoughts on the matter go unexplored. We should take a quick step back and note that pretty much every iteration of Frankenstein, beginning with Mary Shelley's 1818 novel, is preoccupied with the juxtaposition of God and man. The creature in Shelley's book compares itself to both Adam and Satan from John Milton's Paradise Lost, a book that some believe turns Satan into a tragic hero. The novel's original title was Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus, with Prometheus being the titan in Greek mythology who steals fire from the gods to give to man. It's clear why Shelley would see Prometheus in Frankenstein as both colored outside their God given lines. All of those comparisons are echoed in this film. Sometimes it's overtly, as when someone refers to Victor as a modern Prometheus. At other times, it's more subtle. The blind grandfather invites the creature to read Paradise Lost as the last step of his education. The Bible was the first book that the grandfather encouraged the creature to learn, and the creature says that he embraces the stories of Adam and Eve, the collapse of a tower, and the wrath of a god. The blind man theorizes that even God himself had questions. God was curious about death, and that is why he sent his son. But while the grandfather and his family seem to have some belief in God, even if the theology gets screwy, they also cling to more pagan superstitions. When they see the good deeds that the creature secretly does for them, they all decide that it's the work of the spirit of the forest. The device that Frankenstein constructs to give life to his creation is shaped very much like a cross. No accident in the hands of a director like Del Toro, and metal shards surround the device's headrest, looking very much like a halo or an exuberant crown of thorns. And when Victor's done with his work, he says, it is finished, which must be an explicit echo of Jesus' final words on the cross. We hear references to Roman gods and a massive relief in a wall depicting Medusa's head. Another reference to Greek mythology graces Victor's laboratory. Someone declares his desire to be the new Adam. Sexual and romantic content, the creature is covered only in a loincloth for much of his time with Victor. But before he's given life, we see his stitched together body lying uncovered on a table, where viewers get a partial glimpse of his privates. Though not designed to be titillating, other subjects of Victor's experiments go unclothed. We see the exposed flank of one body. Victor himself jumps out of a bathtub and scurries around his laboratory, completely naked. We glimpse his rear end. We see critical bits of female anatomy through a sheer outfit. Victor is clearly attracted to Elizabeth, his brother's fiancée. When he sees her go to confession, he sneaks into the confessional booth and pretends to be a priest. When Elizabeth says that she has sinned and the target of that sin is Victor, Victor hopefully suggests lust, hatred, Elizabeth says. Knowing that it was Victor listening all along, Victor is not dissuaded. He does everything he can to seduce Elizabeth away from William, and the two become far too familiar, especially given the movie's Victorian setting. But Elizabeth, while tempted, never cheats with Victor. And when she rejects Victor for good, she tells him choice is the seat of the soul, and she's chosen William. The creature may be attracted to Elizabeth too, and she to him. Their interactions carry the signatures of a romance, but the true nature of their attraction to each other remains open to interpretation and enigmatic, perhaps even to them. Is the creature attracted to Elizabeth or to Elizabeth's kindness? Is Elizabeth attracted to the creature or what the creature represents? The movie declines to answer. We learn a character has contracted a venereal disease. The creature demands that Victor make him a companion. Victor rejects the request. worrying about procreation, violent content. The creature may be the film's intended hero, but he's a killer as well. Several people and a few animals die by his hand, often after he flings them into walls or rocks. He tears off someone's jawbone and rips part of the hide off a wolf that's attacking him. In fairness, his deadly assaults are almost always triggered by someone trying to kill him. He's shot repeatedly, and often people believe they've successfully dispatched the monster. Wolves tear into his flesh. Twice he sinks into bodies of water, apparently to drown. Victor's attempts to create the creature aren't violent, but they are grotesque and inhumane. He introduces his theory in Edinburgh with a partial cadaver, a human head and torso, featuring an exposed brain and dangling spine. He brings the thing back to life, and it gasps in surprise and, in my viewing, pain. Victor turns the reanimated being into a bit of sideshow entertainment to prove his point. His laboratory features other corpses, including another whose brain is exposed, with the skin of his back peeled away, revealing the spine. As Victor's building his creation, he inspects condemned criminals as they wait to be hanged, treating them almost like grocery produce, and combs body riddled battlefields looking for promising specimens. We see a great deal of carnage on those battle sites, including a man whose face has been partly blown off and a frozen horse and rider. Once the creature's body has been completed, Victor drags massive, bloody bags of his rejected leavings. Someone later finds the bones of those bodies, and both scenes suggest that dozens of bodies were used to craft the creature. Someone calls the creature the child of a charnel house. Someone is shot and killed. Another character falls to his death, and we see him land. A man is killed by wolves. A woman bleeds to death after going into labor. Victor's leg is gruesomely smashed after an explosion. As a child, Victor is educated by his father and punished for giving wrong answers. When he goofs on one, he holds out his hands expectantly, assuming his father will slap a riding crop on them. Victor's father says that Victor's hands are now instruments that require special care, and he hits him across the cheek with the crop instead. Conclusion: of all the parts that made that man, which one holds the soul? William asks this question of Victor, and Victor is unable to answer. It's an important question, though, and one that's inescapable when we are talking about Frankenstein. Director Guillermo del Toro has spoken of his desire to make a version of Frankenstein since at least 2007. And it would seem Frankenstein and his monster fit Del Toro's oeuvre like a hand in a red leather glove. Del Toro loves his monsters, and he wants us to love them too. From Hellboy to The Shape of Water to even Pinocchio. The story of another man made creature who is mysteriously granted life. He sides with the other, the thing different from you and me. In Frankenstein, he is given the ultimate sympathetic monster, a creature born of hubris against his own wishes. I am obscene to you, the creature says, but to me, I simply am. The creature never asked for any of this. And that sense of unintended tragedy permeates the story of Frankenstein from its 19th century origins through its 1930s classic horror flicks and now in Netflix's Oscar bait offering. But Del Toro, an agnostic reared in the Catholic Church, is fascinated by themes of faith too. And that too is at the center of the Frankenstein myth. Those of us who believe in God know that life isn't just a product of a beating heart, heaving lungs, and electrical impulses firing in the brain. We believe in the soul, the immortal core of our mortal selves. And throughout every story of Frankenstein, that question of soul lurks in every corner, rests on every operating table. In Del Toro's agnostic eyes, a God given soul may ultimately be out of the mix. The creature is better than his creator, Del Toro believes, blessed with an innocence and kindness that the world does its best to corrupt. It's a lovely thought that some may wish was true, but it's a thought utterly opposed to both logic and Christian doctrine. We know that a copy of a copy can't match the quality of the original. We know that we are sinful creatures from the get go, perpetually in need of a savior. Moreover, this Frankenstein film is a bit Frankensteinian itself. Unquestionably, Del Toro has stitched together an impressive aesthetic work, plucking what he found most compelling from the book and the movies and shaping it into something utterly new, entirely familiar, and deeply challenging. It reminds us that the director is indeed a master at his craft. but the finished creation can be horrible to behold. The film wallows in splashy and unnecessary grotesquerie, flirts with forbidden intimacies, and finds the time to throw in some unnecessary nudity too. While the film may deserve its secular accolades, it, like the creature at its core, is missing a God given soul. Paul Asay has been part of the plugged in staff since 2007, watching and reviewing roughly 15 quintillion movies and television shows. He's written for a number of other publications too, including Time, The Washington Post, and Christianity Today. The author of several books, Paul loves to find spirituality in unexpected places, including popular entertainment, and he loves all things superhero. His vices include James Bond films, Mountain Dew, and terrible B grade movies. He is married, has two children, and a neurotic dog, runs marathons on occasion, and hopes to someday own his own tuxedo. Feel free to follow him on Twitter at AsePaul. How did I find monsters? My father. It was around Halloween 1956, the same week of Elvis Presley's second appearance on Ed Sullivan. My parents often let me stay up and watch late movies. Adventure stuff mainly Tarzan, Tiger Hunters, Roy Rogers, Gene Autry. Earlier that year, the first monster I met was King Kong when my father introduced me to him late one night. One evening, a couple of weeks later, my father said, I have something special for you tonight. It was James Whale's 1931 Frankenstein. My mother wasn't happy. She had seen the film when it was first released as an 18-year-old woman in Salt Lake City. That particular theater, as a gimmick, parked an ambulance outside the lobby in case anybody fainted. My mother said that during the scene in which the monster was straining against his chains, reaching upward toward a god's light he would never receive, she fled. I made them open up that damn ambulance and let me sit there until the movie was over and my friends came out. After that, she vowed never to watch a movie in a theater again. Monsters in the dark on large screens, that was enough for her. Indeed, she never went back into a film theater. She wouldn't even take me to see Bambi. My father had to do that. She did not want me to see Frankenstein when I was so young, but my father said, I'll sit next to him, with my arm around him the whole time. My mother said, I'll be in the kitchen if you need me. I was fine until that scene in which the monster, though I've come to prefer calling him the creation, was straining against his chains, reaching upward toward a god's light he would never receive. Then I ran to find my mother. She was standing by the window, her arms crossed sternly as she studied the moonlit industrial outskirts where we lived. Did you get scared? I lied. No, it just seemed silly to me. I was, of course, terrified. Still, I wanted to know what would happen to this thing who never asked for creation. In her novel Frankenstein, author Mary Shelley quoted John Milton's Paradise Lost. Did I request thee, Maker, from my clay to mold me, man? Did I solicit thee from darkness to promote me? So I rejoined my father. I was mesmerized by the rest of Frankenstein, and I felt sorry for Boris Karloff's character, even when the creation unintentionally drowned a little girl because he wanted to see if she might float like the flowers she had been tossing into a lake. I understood that he had not meant to kill her. She was the only person who had shown him kindness. I never felt sorry for the monster's creator, the titular character played by Colin Clive. Victor Frankenstein abandoned his creation, leaving him alone and unprotected as the world pursued and sought to assign the creation back to death. Ever since, there's never been a Halloween season when I haven't watched Frankenstein. I still feel my father's arm around me. I'm not sure why he loved horror films so much. We never talked about it, of course. Maybe it was because he had been a stuntman in Hollywood. He said he'd met and liked Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, that he'd smoked opium with the latter. But it was also because he felt, until the day he died, like an outsider, a throwaway, a man on the run. He spent much of his life one step ahead of anybody dragging him back to some place of judgment he deluded. The family gospel stands to this day. There is no creepier, no more disturbing cinema experience than the 1931 Frankenstein in the big dark of a movie theater. The graveyard opening alone portends dread, obsession, and fates that are already too late to be turned away from. In some ways, Colin Clive was as sinister in the film as Boris Karloff. Indeed, more so, Frankenstein the book is its own entity, one of Western literature's great novels, as well as one of its most imaginative. Written by a teenage woman, Mary Shelley, who wove her own life experience and the uncertainty and the glory of the times through its pages. Frankenstein. The novel is about many things, including the life of the mind and how the human heart divides and devastates us. The novel is a rich and endlessly revealing work. Frankenstein, the film, though, is its own beast. It is about one thing, a death that cannot die. That's how it felt and looked to me even as a child. Death across its landscape, death in the faces, death in their desires and touches. After my father died of cancer in 1962, Frankenstein and any number of other horror stories became meditations for me on what was beyond and what came back, but never should have. The dream of Undith is as old as death. One of its most famous invocations is from the Gospel of John, in the instance of Jesus raising Lazarus from a tomb. He raised others from death as well, but Lazarus proved a key event in Jesus' own fate. Though Lazarus is one of the most interesting figures in the New Testament, little is known about him other than he was a previously unmentioned friend of Jesus, whose death saddened him enough that, famously, Jesus wept. Yet Jesus knew that Lazarus was near death and did nothing to save him beforehand. As Lazarus' sisters complained to the Lord, the story makes it plain that Jesus allowed Lazarus to die so that he could raise him from the dead, proving his claim and power as the Messiah. He tells his disciples, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. This is a terrible way of preparing a miracle, letting somebody you love die so you can bring the person back to life. How would Lazarus feel about this? His friend would not save him. He had been seriously ill, but instead allowed him to die only to raise him from death after a few days. What was that like for Lazarus? According to one legend, Lazarus never smiled again. For as long as he lived in the years after his resurrection, he was haunted by his memory of the unredeemed souls he had seen during the days of his stay in hell before Jesus raised him. Wait, Lazarus could remember what death had been like. He had been in hell. Why? According to Jewish teachings, hell can be compared to an intense feeling of shame. People are ashamed of their misdeeds, and this constitutes suffering, which makes up for the bad deeds. When one has so deviated from the will of God, one is said to be in Gehenna, the abode of the damned in the afterlife, in Jewish and Christian eschatology, the doctrine of last things. Did Jesus truly redeem Lazarus or just forestall hell for him? Resurrection is not necessarily a blessing, not at all. In 2015, when I had throat cancer, one doctor told me I had at best 5 years. I should have felt fear. I'd been afraid of cancer more than anything since it claimed my father when I was still a child. But within minutes of my diagnosis, I made an acceptance of the knowledge that death was coming. My brother Gary Gilmore, in early 1977, in the last days of his own life, had told me that knowing the manner and time of your death was freeing and a comfort. I didn't believe him. But then, son of a gun, there I was in late 2015. What I was thinking wasn't so much along the lines of what the monster proclaims in Bride of Frankenstein: we belong dead. But what did he know or remember about death? Did he believe he deserved it again, or was he simply lonely? His resurrection was perhaps kinder than Lazarus, because the monster could never truly be outside death. It stayed in him every moment, so it was probably less fearsome. Lazarus couldn't smile again. That's a hell of a way to live after dying. I found a certain kindness in my own experience of dying because I was loved and valued as never before, and that love willed me to stay alive. Of course, I didn't die, and then all bets were off. As a result, I became much more anxious. Still am. Had I simply forestalled hell? But unlike Lazarus, I can smile. One afternoon, around a year after my father's death, my mother had enough of my infatuation with dark tales. I want you to stop reading all those morbid books about ghosts and horror and evil, she told me. I do not intend for all my sons to grow up to be monsters. I was about 12 then. I hid my many Lovecraft, Poe, and other horror volumes, and my famous Monsters of Filmland magazine collection under my bed, because there was no way my mother was ever going to clean under my bed. After she went to sleep around midnight, I turn on my overhead reading light and enter those dark worlds that I recognized and that comforted me, and that always would. My father was prescient in one regard. He left me truths to remember him by. My mother was right as well. She left me Mormon creationist fantasies, just as perdurable, just as scary. Well, almost as perdurable. Frankenstein, my father, cancer, my brother, even Lazarus. They taught me that death has its time and place, but it should be only one time and place. The possibility of anything past that, even resurrection, was pure horror. How I experienced real monsters in my own life was something different, though it too had to do with my family. Horror made its way through our house even before I met Frankenstein, and again, my father was the source. I grew up in a home where murder was born. The killer was my brother Gary. I understood how he came to be that person. I think I'd always known that since I was a child and saw how my father scorned him and how the law went on to reinforce my father's will. There wasn't going to be any mercy for that boy while he was still a boy. I once visited the Oregon Boys Prison, where my brother was incarcerated at 14 after a car theft conviction. Despite what might have been the best intentions of some, the reform school experience of the 1950s had many brutalizing aspects about it. Boys were locked up in cold and isolated conditions, sometimes beaten at the discretion of their counselors, and subjected to an environment in which astonishing acts of violence and sexual abuse took place. For some kids, being caged up in such a world only deepened their fears and their hatred. It doesn't make sense to a normal person. One former inmate told me, but when you are locked up, you can become a very hate filled individual. And if you can't externalize that hate, or if a fantasy about going into a bank with a Tommy gun and blowing everybody up isn't enough for you, then you turn that hatred on yourself. You reach a point of self destructiveness where you're going to have somebody really give you the ultimate. And sometimes the only way to do that is by hurting or enraging other people as much as you can. One of the facilities managers wrote at the time, Gary is still our boy in the corner. I still believe Gary will not trust anyone, staff or boy. He tries to be one of the group but seems unable to do so. When I talk to a group, he will go into a corner and not take any part in the discussion. The manager also noted that Gary seemed to have bad dreams almost every night and often talked in his sleep. The only way to effect change was to change my father's repudiation of his son, and the counselors doubted that would happen. Both father and son had monstrous mutual resentments. Years later, when the prison system finally extended my brother some leniency, the boy was no longer a boy. He was a man in his 30s, and he had a razor sharp expression that was on the outlook for any motivation for payback. When he finally allowed himself the pretext to kill, in the summer of 1976, he murdered two young Mormon men in Provo, Utah, my mother's hometown, on consecutive nights. Shot each in the back of the head after forcing them to kneel face down before him. Neither man had done anything to offend him. They were objects of his anger and a family's bad history in the wrong place on bad nights. So, yes, I knew how wrong and anger can get jammed so badly into a person's heart that he might want to murder the world in retaliation. That is, I understand how that hatred can be born, bred, and formed, at least on one level, psychological. Compassionate, intellectual, one of those damn levels. But on a visceral level, I never could. In the early 1990s, I spent several days in Utah doing some research about my brother's murders and my family's history. One night, I drove out to the location of the gas station where my brother had murdered attendant Max Jensen. After Jensen knelt down and gave my brother a small smile, and then my brother fired two rounds into his head. All these years later, the service station had been torn down and replaced, now modern and gleaming. It still stood out there alone, though, in the sands, with beautiful mountains in the background. That night that I visited, I bought some gasoline to justify being there. Then I walked around. This place was a space in space, and blood had forever spoiled its ground, no matter any attempt to cover it over. The hour was around dark. I stood there, put my hands in my pockets, tried to connect with what had happened in that place, to wish rest for the spirits in the dark. On another evening, I visited the motel lobby where my brother had murdered manager Ben Bushnell on the night after Jensen. My oldest brother Frank was in the car with me on this occasion. I asked if he'd come inside with me. He shook his head in a big no motion, staring straight ahead. I just can't, Mikal, he said. You have to walk this one yourself. You ask me, we have no business being here. What we have is shame. I went inside anyway. I felt obliged. I made an excuse for walking in. I asked the night manager about their room rates. Then I froze. This was a very small, domesticated room. The night manager stood behind a counter, probably the same one Bushnell had been behind when my brother took the motel's money box, then shot the manager in the head. He realized that the man wouldn't die immediately, so he tried to shoot him again. But the gun misfired and wounded my brother's thumb. Within hours, he was arrested and in jail cells, which is all he'd ever see until early one morning the following January, when he walked from death row past those beautiful mountains to a van that took him to a cannery at Draper Prison. There, a firing squad fired bullets into his heart. He had forced the state to carry out its death sentence. America was back in the business of killing the guilty. I thought about this in that motel lobby. The space behind the counter was narrow, a terrible place to die. I almost threw up. I turned and left abruptly, went back to the car where Frank was. I sat there for a minute, unable to turn the engine on, and I thought, as I had at the service station, Gary, how could you? How could he have taken these young men's lives just to end the world around him and his part in it? I remember these things often, even after all these years, both the killings and my visit to those sites. When a notorious shooting takes place, all I see is my brother's face in the place of the killer's visage. There is, of course, a difference between two murders on consecutive nights and killing, say, nearly 60 people and injuring nearly 600 more in a matter of minutes, as happened a few years ago in Las Vegas. But my brother and the man in Las Vegas perhaps shared some kind of unfathomable moral lacuna. They hated long enough that they found nights when they'd kill somebody, anybody, everybody. These days, mass killings are frequent as well. Why? The easy access to efficient lethal weaponry is certainly a major means. Are the fictional monsters I've studied commensurate with real life monsters for me? No, but I understand they might be for others. Horror colludes. For me, the fictional ones are metaphors. They possess invented psychologies and have special rights nobody else has. The victims are merely there to receive the monster's hurt and the monster's fear. In real life, the only true monsters are humans. It's much more disturbing and resonant when human monsters get to claim what they deem their special rights. One trait, though, might bond them. Both fictive and palpable monsters are hated. They are outsiders, outcasts, they have been repudiated, perhaps for fair reason. But that repudiation can also create and motivate the monster. Hurt an animal enough, and it might turn on you, justifying your hatred, but also maybe sealing fates. A couple of months back, I was talking to my therapist about Frankenstein, the book more than the film. She didn't know the book and asked me to tell her about it and to talk about my attachment to it. I told her the tale of how Victor Frankenstein had made his creation, then immediately abandoned him in revulsion, leaving the creation to find a way in the world alone, with no memory of a self, with no acceptance by others, with no help except for what he could learn for himself. Vengeance and murder follow as creator and creation vow to destroy each other. And why are you attracted to this story so much? My therapist asked. Is there something familiar in it? And suddenly it hit me, yes. I never realized it before, but this is the story of my father and my brother. I had no way of anticipating that. Of course, all those years ago when I was a child, and my father first showed me the film, long before Gary's crimes and long before both of their deaths. Besides, the story dynamic between the creator and his creation don't quite share the same through line in the 1931 film as in the 1818 novel, though both the novel and the film are, in a sense, stories of fathers and sons. Though my father gave me a copy of Shelley's book shortly before his death, I don't know if he'd ever read it himself. But there it was, hidden in all those years of our history. Frankenstein was an unconscious prophecy in my family's life. If my father had understood that his refusal to love his son would hurt and embitter that son to the degree that he would later kill, after so many years of rage had been stuffed inside his heart, if my father had known that, would he have treated his son differently? I doubt it, because my father had his own hurt, his own family's denials that he was acting from.